Hey, what's going on everybody? Hope that you're doing well. Today we are going to be going over shooting video on your DSLR camera. So let's take a look. Now, if you haven't watched my video on how to shoot photos with a DSLR camera, I would recommend checking that one out, as I go over some of the basic settings of the DSLR camera. Most of the principles are still the same for video, but I won't be going over most of those settings in this video. Now, not all DSLR cameras are the same. You're going to have different body shapes, you're going to have different sensor sizes, you're going to have different inputs. I'm going to be doing all of this on my Canon 60D. I will be going over some of the basics of video like resolution, frame rates, audio, color profiles, and probably a few other things. Resolution is how big of a frame you're recording. You might see some options such as SD, HD, UHD. You might see some numbers like 720, 1080, 4K, 1920 by 1080. Your camera might not have all of these resolutions, but it should have something there. Now, the higher the resolution you record at, the more space it's going to take up on your memory card, so just keep that in mind for storage. Now, depending on the project that you're shooting, you might need to shoot at that higher resolution. So if you're shooting a feature film or a short film, then yes, you might need that higher resolution. If you're just shooting online content, you might be able to just get away with HD. I shoot all of my YouTube content in HD. The reason behind that is because not everybody watches everything at the highest resolution. Not everybody has a 4K TV or a 4K monitor. I'm not saying that's everybody. I just like HD and it still works pretty good for me. You choose what resolution is best for you and your project. Next, let's talk about frame rates. The frame rate is how many frames are being captured in 1 second. You might see some options like 24, 2398, 24 FPS. That stands for frames per second. You might see 30p or 30i. Those are progressive frames and interlaced frames. Now, your camera might only have a few frame rates. It might have a lot of frame rates. Some of those frame rates might only be tied to certain resolutions. Now, if you want that cinematic look that everybody's always looking for, you're going to want to shoot in 24 frames per second. That is what most movies are shot in, but not all of them. If you want to shoot in slow motion, you're going to want to shoot in a high frame rate. So if you're in your editing software and you have a 24 frames per second timeline, and you throw in a clip that you shot in 48, 60, 90, 120 frames per second, and you slowed it down in that timeline, it's going to look smooth. Now, if you were to do that with a 24 frames per second clip, you might see some stuttering, you might see some artifacts, and that's just no good. So make sure you choose the right frame rate for you and your project. Along with resolution and frame rate, your camera might have the option for bitrate. And not all cameras have this option, so don't worry if you don't see it. Mine does not because it is an older camera. Now just remember that the higher the bitrate, the higher quality your image is going to be. And it's going to eat up more space on your memory card. Now, the reason why you'd want to go with a higher bitrate is because the quality is much better. It is going to give you more flexibility in post-production. So make sure you choose the right bitrate for your project. Sometimes you can get away with a lower bitrate, but you just choose what's best for you. Let's talk about color profiles. Now, I went over color profiles in my other video about photos. With video, it's just a little bit different. Now, I like to shoot in a flat profile, and what that is very little contrast, very little saturation. I also like to turn down the sharpness in my profile as well. The reason why I like to shoot in a flat profile is because it gives me a little bit more flexibility when I'm in post-production doing color correction. I can create a little bit more of a stylized look and just with that little bit of flexibility. Now depending on your camera, you might have the option to shoot in RAW or log. These profiles are great if you're going to be doing color correction. If you're not going to be doing color correction, I'd steer clear of these two profiles. Now everybody has their own opinion about profiles, but you just choose what looks best to you and what's good for your project. Let's talk about audio for your camera. Some cameras have built-in microphones and they just don't sound very good and they're just there to capture sound. Some cameras have a built-in microphone jack, and so you can always plug in an external microphone and it sounds much better. But if you don't have the jack and you don't like the sound of the internal microphone, your other option is to use an external recorder, and the quality of that is really good. And here's the audio quality of the DSLR with the internal microphone. Go ahead and plug in an external microphone. And here's the quality with the external microphone. You might notice that it's a little bit better. And here's the quality of the external recorder coming from the shotgun mic, so at least you can hear the difference. But the downside of that is that you need to sync the audio with the video file. There is software to help you do that, but if you don't have that software and you have trouble just syncing up the audio file with the video file, you could always use a visual and a sound, like a slate. Or if you want to do it like a lot of indie filmmakers that always forget their slates, you can use your hands. Lastly, I just want to touch on one other thing. Now, I went over this in my other video about taking photos, but to get good exposure, you're going to need to adjust the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. Now, one thing about the shutter speed though, you're going to want it double whatever the frame rate is. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you're going to want to have your shutter speed at 48, or as close to 48 as possible. With my camera, I have my shutter speed at 50. The reason behind this is because it's going to give you the right amount of motion blur for your video to make it look good. Thanks for watching this video. I hope that it helped you understand a little bit more about shooting video with your camera. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below and I'll try my best to help out. But thanks again for watching. Hit that like button if you like this video, subscribe if you'd like, and I'll catch you on the next one.